He shoved her so hard the straps of her backpack snapped against her shoulders, and the books she carried burst out like startled birds. Paperbacks slapped against the grimy floor of the bus station, pages fanning open in the draft of doors that hissed each time another traveler slipped through. It should have been nothing more than a stumble, the kind of clumsy accident commuters forgot in a second. But the way he laughed turned it into something else. It wasn't the laugh of surprise. It was the sound of ownership. A young man, maybe 17 or 18, broad-shouldered with a haircut sharp enough to look like armor, looked down at her as if he had just proved a point. His friends circled like satellites, their sneakers squeaking on tile, their voices pitched loud enough to cut across the muffled station announcements. "Look at this," he crowed, snatching the strap of her bag before she could recover. He tossed it across the circle to another boy, who fumbled it like a football and threw it back. Pages fluttered, a pen clattered to the floor, and their laughter echoed above the idling bus engines outside. The girl, 16, maybe 17, her jacket too thin for the chill of the March evening, scrambled after them. She crouched to gather her books, hair falling into her face, fingers trembling as she clutched at paper that seemed to scatter faster the harder she tried. She looked up once, not at him, but at the people watching. Commuters with briefcases, a couple in business clothes, 2 college kids waiting with earbuds dangling. None of them moved. Some turned their eyes away, others pulled out phones. When she spoke, her voice broke halfway through the plea. "Please, just give it back." The boy puffed out his chest, mocking the crack in her tone. "What was that?" "I didn't hear you." He stepped closer, his sneakers squealing against the floor. Then he shoved again, this time with a flat palm to the shoulder. She stumbled backward, knees striking hard tile. More laughter, sharper this time, some of it bouncing out of his friends, some of it spilling from strangers who didn't know what else to do with the tension but let it out in nervous chuckles. The backpack dangled in his hand now, half-zipped, its contents spilling like guts. He swung it lazily, enjoying the weight. "Say it," he shouted, loud enough for the entire waiting hall to hear. "Say I'm the boss. Say it, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Her cheeks were hot with shame, her eyes wet. She tried to pull herself up without shaking, to gather even a shred of dignity in front of the growing circle. "Please," she whispered again, voice swallowed by their laughter. Someone in the back muttered, "This isn't right," but no one stepped forward. Shoes shifted uneasily, but the invisible wall between bystanders and responsibility stayed intact. People watched through glass, through distance, through the glow of phone screens that turned the moment into content instead of crisis. The boy tilted his head back, laughter splitting his throat, his hand high with her bag swinging like a trophy. For him, the station wasn't a station anymore. It was a stage. Every second he dragged out her humiliation was another chance to prove to his friends, to strangers, to himself, that he owned this moment. But under the noise, there was a different sound, a silence thick enough to feel. A silence that pressed in on the commuters, that made one older man near the vending machines clear his throat and then stop, that made the girl's breathing audible in short, shallow gasps. It was the silence before a storm. He barked again, his voice louder than the station announcements. "Say it! Say I'm your boss!" His friends whooped, egging him on. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came, and the crowd stayed frozen, caught between shame and fear, eyes darting not toward the girl, but toward the boy who demanded center stage. Phones stayed raised, recording, the glow of their screens casting thin blue light over the scene. At that moment, no one in the room realized it yet, But he had already made the first mistake of the evening. Because someone was watching. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, Bello. The crowd tried to grow a conscience and found a throat instead. A man in a parka said, "Hey, knock it off." But it came out thin and polite, like he was asking someone to lower a radio. A college kid in a beanie took half a step forward, then felt his girlfriend's fingers hook his sleeve and pull him back. Someone else hissed, "Leave her," and the sound got absorbed by the station, by the humming lights, the distant brakes of buses, the tin voice of the PA announcing a delay no one cared about. The boy with the bag heard all of it and smiled wider. He lifted the backpack higher, shoulders squared like a referee had just raised his hand. "What?" he shouted, scanning faces for a challenger. "Somebody want to be next?" He leaned into the words, turned them into a dare. His friends howled on cue, the laughter bright and pointless. People retreated as if the floor had tilted toward him. A woman tucked her purse under her arm and took 2 careful steps backward, eyes down. A security guard visible through the glass office door made a motion that looked like, "Hold on," then stayed where he was, staring at a clipboard as though paperwork could protect him from choices. The girl stayed low, palms hunting for pages on the dirty tile. Her hand shook in that weak, infuriating way hands do when the body wants to run, but the situation refuses to end. "Please," she said again, louder this time, trying to scrape dignity onto the plea, but her voice broke at the edge, and the break fed the laughter. Phones lifted everywhere. Screens caught the fluorescent hum, the dust motes, the boy's grin, the tears she blinked away and failed to hide. Someone whispered, "This is going to go viral," as if that were a promise of justice. Another answered, "Someone has to stop him," as if saying the sentence divided the responsibility fairly among all present. The boy turned a slow circle for his audience, playing the part of a ringmaster who couldn't believe his luck. "Say it," he told her again, dragging each word like a chair across a floor. "Say, I'm your boss." He took a step and kicked one of her paperbacks with the side of his shoe. It slid under a bench and disappeared into shadow. Her lips flattened. She swallowed. "Please," she said. Each letter forced past shame. Her voice made the kind of sound that sticks in a listener's throat for hours afterward. But right then, it simply vanished in the laughter's heat. A bus door hissed open outside and let in a blade of cold air. It cut across the waiting hall and raised gooseflesh along forearms, lifted the corner of a timetable taped to a pillar. For 3 seconds, the smell of diesel and damp wool got stronger. No one moved. "Next!" he shouted again, and his friends barked for him, delighted. A kid near the vending machines muttered, "Man, chill," then pretended to read the list of snacks like it was a legal document. The laughter didn't stop so much as it tripped. The first stumble came from the edge of the crowd, a pocket of silence too small to notice until it began to spread like a stain. Heads turned without meaning to. The boy's nearest friend frowned at something over the girl's shoulder and shut his mouth. Space opened the way water parts around something solid. It wasn't dramatic. No trumpet, no announcement. People just stepped aside, some quickly, as if they'd been shoved. Others with the bemused look of commuters who've forgotten why they're moving, but know they should. A woman with a suitcase rolled it closer to her calves and pressed herself against a pillar. A teenager, phone lifted high, lowered it an inch without taking his thumb off record. He came in with the cold. Gray jacket. Plain boots. The kind of face you've seen 1,000 times on screens and somehow never expect to see at human height, under bad lights, breathing the same thick air as the rest of the room. He didn't loom, he didn't need to. The crowd did that part for him, making distance where there hadn't been any, offering a corridor because the body knows when to make room, even if the mouth hasn't caught up. He didn't speak. He walked. Each step was unhurried and exact, heel then ball. The kind of quiet footfall you notice only because everything else in you has begun to notice. The boy with the bag didn't see him at first. He was busy watching himself reflected in 100 small screens, busy hearing his own voice echoing back at him. His friends saw first and went quiet. Silence is contagious when it comes from the right source. The girl saw him before anyone told her to look. It happened the way recognition does in photographs. Sudden, total. Her hands paused among the pages. Something let go inside her shoulders. Hope doesn't make sound, but if it did, it would have sounded like the small breath she pulled in and held. He stopped at the edge of the circle and stooped without drama, without asking permission of the moment. A paperback lay face down nearby, its cover creased, the spine already tired from a life in backpacks. He picked it up, wiped grit from the corner with his thumb like a habit, and set it on the bench above the girl's head. The boy finally turned, pulled by the gravity of attention shifting away from him. He blinked, confused that the room he thought he owned had rearranged itself without his consent. He lifted the backpack a little higher, as if to remind everyone of the prop that made him important. The strap creaked under the weight. No one laughed. Doors hissed open and closed at the far end of the station. Shoes squeaked. A child asked a mother, "Who is that?" in a voice so clean it cut the air. The mother didn't answer. She was staring with everyone else. He kept walking. One more step, then one more. No roll to the shoulders, no squared jaw, no face for the cameras that were already finding angles. He didn't look into a lens, because the lens didn't matter. He looked at the girl, at her hands, at the mess the floor had made of her evening. He looked at the boy last. The boy's mouth found a shape like a joke and couldn't put sound through it. The security guard behind glass set the clipboard down and stood, the door hitting his hip on the way out. He took a single step into the waiting hall and stopped, as if instruction had arrived that told him anything he said would be the wrong words in the wrong order. He closed the remaining distance like it wasn't distance at all. The crowd drew in, tighter, held by a pressure that had nothing to do with fists. Phones dipped unconsciously, eyes lifted. The room felt smaller because it had a center now. He didn't have to say a thing to turn the volume down. He had brought the kind of quiet that makes people hear their own breathing. The boy adjusted his grip on the backpack. The fabric rasped against his palm. His friends stared at their shoes. The girl wiped her nose with the back of her wrist and tried to stand without scrambling. He stopped a foot away from the mess, and the boy, and the silence. He looked at the scattered books, then at the girl, then finally, properly, at the boy holding what wasn't his. He still hadn't spoken. But the room had already heard something. He didn't just stop at the edge of the circle. He walked into it with the calm of someone who had no doubt where he belonged. The floor seemed to accept him, and the crowd made space instinctively, as if pulled back by a force that wasn't loud but undeniable. The station lights fell flat on his shoulders, buzzing faintly, throwing harsh white onto tile that reflected only pieces of his outline. He wasn't dressed for spectacle. Plain jacket, boots dulled by years, a face as familiar as it was unexpected. Still, the weight of the room tilted toward him. The boy holding the backpack didn't notice at first. He was still trying to hold the attention of strangers who had already begun slipping away from him. His friends saw sooner, saw the silence ripple through the bystanders, saw the way phones stopped wobbling in hands and lifted a little steadier. Their laughter died in their throats, replaced by the uneasy half-grins of kids who suddenly realize the game has changed. The girl noticed immediately. She had been crouched low, scooping her books one at a time with shaking hands, every breath shallow, afraid to draw more attention than she already had. Then she looked up and saw him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She froze, book clutched to her chest, as if the sudden arrival of someone steady had broken the spell. Hope doesn't usually show itself in public places, but it showed in the way her shoulders relaxed for the first time since the shove. He stooped without a word. A paperback lay face down by his boot, pages bent against the grit of the floor. He picked it up, shook dust from the corner, and carefully smoothed a folded page with his thumb. It was nothing, a tiny gesture, invisible in any other context, but here it mattered. He handed the book to the girl. She held it like he'd returned more than paper, like he'd handed back something no one else in the room had thought she deserved. Then he straightened and finally turned toward the boy. The crowd seemed to lean forward all at once, pulled toward a center that hadn't existed until that moment. The boy tried to smile, but the edges of it cracked when no one echoed him. His friends looked anywhere but his face. The phones stayed up, but they weren't recording for him anymore. "Lose your bus, Grandpa?" he said, forcing the words into the still air. He glanced sideways, waiting for laughter to break the tension. It didn't. Even his closest friend just coughed awkwardly and studied his shoes. A woman near the bench pressed her purse tight against her side. The station itself seemed to hum louder, as if the lights and the air conditioning were in on the silence. The man didn't answer. He bent again, slow, unbothered, and picked up another book, this one with a torn cover and a bus ticket wedged between the pages. He brushed it off and placed it on top of the first in the girl's hands, aligning the edges carefully. She clutched both volumes to her chest and stared, her breathing steadier now. The boy shifted his grip on the backpack, pulling it closer to his body like a shield. He shook it once, the zipper teeth rattling. "Show's over." "Keep walking!" he snapped, louder this time, trying to turn noise into control. The man stayed where he was. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even square his shoulders. He simply looked at the boy, his expression unreadable, and that silence pressed harder than any threat could. The crowd felt it. People's breathing changed. Someone cleared their throat, and then regretted it immediately. The boy's bravado wavered. He stomped a foot forward, a showy move meant to startle. The man didn't flinch. The only flinch belonged to the boy himself, an involuntary jerk in his shoulders he hoped no one had seen. But the crowd saw. His friends saw. The girl saw. And the shame of that tiny reflex landed heavier than a punch. "You think you're scaring me?" he barked, voice cracking with the pressure. The man finally spoke, low and flat, every word shaped like a weight laid carefully on the table. "No." It was the quietest possible answer, but it cut deeper than a scream. The boy blinked, thrown off. He tried to laugh, but the sound died as soon as it left his throat. The man's eyes moved from the boy's fist on the strap to the floor, to the ring of people standing closer now, recording less like spectators and more like witnesses. Then he looked back at the boy, steady and patient, as if giving him one last chance to put the bag down without shame. The boy didn't take it. He clung tighter. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Then the man said what no one expected him to say. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't even raise his chin. He just spoke, calm and deliberate, as if each syllable had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "Now," he said, "try that with me." The words weren't loud, but they traveled farther than the boys' shouts had. They carried into the corners of the station, into the glass booth where the guard froze mid-step, into the phones still held high, into the chest of every person who had pretended a moment earlier not to see. The crowd inhaled together. The boys' friends edged backward, pretending they hadn't moved. The girl hugged her books tighter. Somewhere behind the benches, a clock ticked, and in the silence it sounded like a fuse burning down. The boy opened his mouth, but nothing came. For the first time, he wasn't the loudest person in the room, and everyone knew something had shifted. Every eye in the station fixed on the same patch of floor. It wasn't just two people anymore. It was gravity. The crowd leaned in, drawn by the unspoken certainty that whatever happened next would mark the room forever. Conversations had collapsed into silence. Even the overhead announcement stalled, leaving only the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the heavy rhythm of breathing. The boy was the first to break. He straightened his shoulders, trying to stretch into the role he thought he had built. His voice cracked the silence. "You're old. I'll break you." He stepped forward, loud on purpose, his sneakers squealing against tile. The declaration didn't ring like bravado. It sounded like someone announcing a truth to convince himself. His friends tried to back him with noise, thin laughter, a muttered, "Yeah, get him," but their tones betrayed them. The words trembled, lacking the edge of earlier jeers. Still, the boy carried on. He shoved his shoulder hard into the man's chest, expecting resistance, maybe recoil. Instead, the impact vanished into something immovable. The man shifted the way a rock shifts when the tide hits it, acknowledging pressure but unchanged. The shove fell flat, and the failure hung in the air. "Come on!" one of the boys shouted, too shrill to sound fearless. "Show him!" The call echoed off tile and then died. The rest of the crowd didn't take it up. People held their phones high but steady now, no longer giggling as they recorded. A woman by the benches hugged her purse tighter. The girl with the books clutched them closer, her eyes locked on the man as though the sight of his calm was the only barrier holding her together. The boy scowled, heat flushing up his neck. He threw his chin higher, his voice louder. "Move! You hear me?" He dropped the bag's strap onto his wrist so both hands were free, then shoved again with an open palm. The sound, skin on cloth, was louder than the effect. The man gave no ground. That stillness pressed harder than any strike. It reached into the room in ways shouting could not. People shifted uneasily, breathing shallower, the crowd pulling itself into silence. Even the security guard near the booth froze with his radio half raised, waiting to see if this would turn into something he had no authority to stop. The boy's friends fidgeted. One rubbed at his jaw as if scratching, hiding the tremor of his own hand. Another coughed, but didn't speak again. They had been co-conspirators moments ago. Now they looked like spectators desperate to separate themselves from whatever was unfolding. "You don't scare me," the boy barked, but his voice betrayed a quiver. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was a plea to hold onto the script. He turned his head toward the crowd, searching for the laughter that had always answered him. None came. Faces stared back, recording, weighing, judging. The silence burned worse than heckling. The man's eyes, steady and calm, traveled from the boy's clenched fists to the nylon strap biting red into his wrist, then to the girl's pale knuckles holding her books. When he looked back up, there was no sharpness, no rage, only a steady line that measured the boy in ways the boy could feel but not match. He tried again, forcing out a bark of laughter. "Old man," he spat, clinging to the insult as if it could anchor him. But the word fell hollow. The station swallowed it whole. Even the fluorescent hum seemed louder in reply. The man inhaled, the rise of his chest slow, deliberate. He turned his head just enough to center the boy fully in his view, a gesture that landed heavier than any shove. The crowd leaned closer, the silence like a wire strung tight across the room. And then, finally, he spoke. His voice was even, carried no strain, no need to raise itself. Yet it spread clearly through the station, cutting through the noise that wasn't there. "Every blow you throw at someone weaker," he said, "comes back to you. And today, you'll feel it." The words hit harder than fists. They weren't a warning. They weren't even a threat. They were a sentence pronounced. The crowd reacted in breath, not sound. People inhaled sharply, some shifting feet as though the floor had tilted. The boy's eyes widened before narrowing again, panic flashing behind defiance. His friends stepped back, subtle but unmistakable. The girl's lips parted, and for the first time since her books hit the ground, her face showed something like belief. The station didn't move, but it vibrated with expectation. A dozen phones caught the stillness. The boy's pride demanded he act, but his body hesitated, trapped in the space between show and consequence. The man stood unchanged, every inch of him saying what the words had already carved into stone. The silence drew tighter. It was no longer the hush of a crowd. It was the charged pause before a fuse burns down. Everyone knew it couldn't hold much longer. And when it snapped, the whole station would feel it. The sentence had barely left his mouth when the boy snapped. His pride, already teetering under the silence, lunged before his body did. He tore the backpack from his wrist and let it drop, the thud against the tile sharper than his own intent. A swing followed, clumsy but loud. His arm all shoulder, no discipline. It cut the air with the sound of effort, not danger. The man didn't brace. He tilted his head a fraction, as if listening to something no one else could hear. His body slid an inch to the side, his hand guiding the boy's wrist onward, like water through a channel. The punch missed everything except the emptiness waiting for it. The boy's own momentum betrayed him, spilling him forward. A small rotation of the shoulder, the faintest nudge of a palm, and gravity pulled him down. He landed hard, breath cracking out in a startled grunt. The fall wasn't dramatic. There was no cinematic arc, no crash of limbs. He simply sat down on the unforgiving tile, like the ground had chosen him. For a heartbeat, the entire station froze. Then sound rushed in, gasps, scattered cheers, the sharp click of phones catching the moment. The crowd had wanted a scene. They hadn't expected judgment delivered so quickly. The girl clutched her books tight against her chest. She didn't smile, didn't cheer. She just stood very still, her eyes fixed on the man. Relief looked strange on her face, like a light returning to a place it hadn't visited in years. The boy scrambled up, too fast, too angry. The laughter of strangers hit him harder than the floor had. His neck flushed red, jaw tight, eyes darting from phone to phone. He barked, "That's nothing!" Too loud, too desperate, the kind of volume that only made his humiliation heavier. One of his friends reached out instinctively, a hand at his elbow. He shrugged it off like it burned, mistaking stubbornness for strength. He launched again. This time it was cleaner, tighter. A punch meant to erase the last mistake. But the man was already moving, his arm lifted like a gate opening on oiled hinges. The fist slid past into empty space, redirected by angles the boy didn't know existed. A soft tug at his balance, a touch at his triceps, and his own knee kissed the ground before he realized it was bending. The crowd roared, a sound that cracked against the station walls like thunder in a tunnel. Some clapped, others shouted, but the loudest reaction was the applause that carried weight, heavy, certain, almost reverent. Phones tilted higher, capturing what felt less like a scuffle and more like a lesson being carved into public memory. The boy knelt, one hand splayed on the ground. For a moment, his head dropped, and in that angle he looked smaller, almost younger. But pride dragged his face back up. The glare returned, even as his chest heaved. "You think this means you win?" His voice shook. No one answered. The silence said more than words. His friends shifted backward, trying to melt into the crowd. Their loyalty had limits. Humiliation didn't spread evenly. The man stayed still, his hands loose at his sides, gaze steady. He wasn't gloating, wasn't even smiling. That calm presence pressed harder than any punch. It told everyone watching that this wasn't about spectacle. It was about balance, restoring it in the most efficient way possible. "Enough!" someone shouted from the back. Another voice echoed, "Kid, stop!" But warnings never land on ears deafened by ego. The boy rolled his shoulders, shook his arms loose, and lowered his stance. His eyes darted, not to the man, but to the ring of strangers recording. The weight of being seen left him only one choice in his mind: attack again. The crowd felt it, the shift from mockery to desperation. Mothers pulled children closer. A guard near the booth lifted his radio, but didn't speak. Phones kept recording because habit was stronger than dread. People weren't watching for entertainment anymore. They were bracing for impact. And when the boy drove himself forward one last time, arms flailing with the full measure of his pride, everyone in that station knew they were witnessing the moment of no return. The boy lunged one last time, arms flailing, as if speed alone could erase what had already happened. His sneakers squealed on the tile, his chest heaving with a pride too loud to listen. The crowd tightened, breath caught in collective throats. Someone whispered, "Stop!" But the word broke apart before it reached him. The man didn't brace. He shifted, small and exact, letting the boy's rush carve its own mistake. A palm caught the wrist, gentle but final, guiding it past its target. His other hand met the forearm, circled it, and the boy's weight folded in on itself. No slam, no crash, just geometry deciding for him. In an instant, he was half kneeling, locked in place, every muscle straining against an answer already written. The station went silent. Phones hovered, recording, but even their red lights looked subdued. The boy's breath rasped like sandpaper, loud against the hush. The man leaned in, voice low but carrying. "This is what it feels like when someone stronger holds you. Remember it. You can choose, hurt or protect." No flourish followed. No twist of the arm, no spectacle. He released. The boy's limbs dropped heavy, his knees hitting tile with a sound smaller than his humiliation. He stayed there, head bowed, chest heaving. For the first time all night, he looked young. The girl stepped forward, clutching her books. Her voice was small, almost lost in the cavernous space. "Thank you." He gave a single nod, nothing more, and pointed with his eyes toward the backpack under a bench. She retrieved it quickly, hugging it tight, relief softening her face. The boy's friends melted back, their sneakers squeaking as if guilty of betrayal. One muttered something that died in his throat. The security guard lowered his radio, useless now, and the station itself seemed to exhale. The PA crackled, a bus engine idled, life crept back. The man turned, finally speaking to the crowd. "Strength isn't for humiliating. Strength is for lifting the people everyone else pushes down." It wasn't applause that followed, but something heavier. An exhale, a settling. A mother put her arm around her child. A man near the ticket booth nodded, eyes lowered, as if the words had landed somewhere deep. The boy rose unsteadily, pride fractured. The crowd parted for him without being asked. He didn't look at the man. He barely looked at anyone, his steps clumsy, carrying the weight of silence more than bruises. The girl adjusted her straps, caught the man's gaze again. He didn't offer comfort, only the freedom of choice. A look that said, "You're safe now. Walk your path." She nodded, small but sure, and moved toward the exit. The crowd gave her space, quiet respect replacing the earlier mockery. He stepped back, clearing the space as if it had never belonged to him. The station resumed itself, doors sliding, engines groaning, chatter slowly returning. Phones lowered, hands shaking slightly with what they had caught. He left without ceremony, the cold evening air wrapping him as the sliding doors parted. No one called after him. They didn't need to. What remained was louder. The memory of a single controlled moment that turned noise into silence and humiliation into a lesson carved deeper than any bruise. The lingering question, one that no camera could answer, was whether the boy would remember. Would the silence stay with him after the pain faded? That uncertainty hung in the station air long after he was gone, as heavy and inescapable as the smell of diesel. Sometimes the strongest blow isn't a strike at all, but the restraint that leaves a life standing and demands it choose what comes next.